So we're going to start recording again, and it looks like we've lost a few observers, but we've got the hardcore diehards still here for the students. All right.
Yes, well, welcome. This is our first student-led session of our forums, and we're really looking forward to hearing everything that you guys have been thinking about over the last few years and weeks and months. And we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'd like to get us started straight away with Dave Christopher. This is his third year at the forum, and he's very close to finishing his PhD. And I'm very interested to hear what you have to say, David. Just to remind that we've got 10 minutes. Each student has 10 minutes. We're going to have all four papers one after the other, and then there'll be a 20 to 30 minute section at the end when we can just have some general questions as previously.
The PowerPoint. Is there some way I can bring up the PowerPoint? All right, thanks very much, everybody, for sticking around for the afternoon of student presentations. Those of you who are hardcore, as Karoon said, or otherwise forced to stay, suckers. As you can see, I'm going to try and briefly address the thorny problem of horror cinema and moral conscience in a particular case study, the Canadian example of David Cronenberg. So in the 1970s, for those of you who are familiar with Cronenberg, he's quite an infamous Canadian filmmaker. He produced his first two commercial horror films, Shivers in 1975 and Rabid in 1977, followed by The Brood in 1979, Scanners in 1981, and Videodrome in 1983, amongst some lesser others. If you're not familiar with them, Shivers depicts the various inhabitants of a luxury condominium complex in Montreal, besieged by a very fecal-looking parasite that enters through the mouth, delicious, and renders the victim ravenously sexually uninhibited and aggressively contagious. Rabid sort of picks up where Shivers left off. It features a lead character played by pornography star Marilyn Chambers, who, having undergone a botched experimental plastic surgery, develops a monstrously phallic protrusion in her armpit, through which she infects others, also with uninhibited id, once she seduces them. Now, horror cinema in general has been characterized as sort of a pariah of low art, unworthy of critical attention. Prior to the 1970s, there was almost no scholarship, no scholarly investigation into the cultural significance or the instrumentality of horror cinema. And celebrated Canadian film scholar Robin Wood notices that they were dismissed with contempt by the majority of reviewer critics or simply ignored. Wood goes on to claim that the dismissal of such artworks as horror film, it works for the genre, he says. The censor, in both the common and the Freudian sense, is lulled into sleep and relaxes vigilance. For the filmmaker, however, as well as for the audience, full awareness stops at the level of plot, action, and character, in which the most dangerous and perhaps subversive implications can disguise themselves and escape detection. Now, in Canada, horror films were deemed an even greater aberration. Writing in 2004, popular film critic Selim Vatnsdal states that in Canada, quote, horror movies were looked upon with a good deal less respect. The very idea of a Canadian horror movie to this day invites one of two responses, either the assumption that you must be talking about David Cronenberg, or simple astonishment that such a thing exists. Indeed, the case of David Cronenberg is exemplary of this dismissal on at least two counts. First, it's considered morally degenerate as a form of exploitation film that trades on prurient desires and repressed fantasies of lust and violence against women. Robin Wood's most celebrated contribution to this discourse was his claim that horror films fall into two polarized categories, progressive and reactionary. Now, progressive horror cinema, according to Wood, featured narrative aperture in which the monster remained at large, was not recontained by normalcy or repression, and was frequently an ambiguously sympathetic character, oppressed by a culture unwilling to recognize and satisfy its needs. Reactionary horror films, by contrast, represent narratives in which monstrous identities are successfully vanquished before the narrative closure and repression triumphs in a return to normalcy. Interestingly, Wood reserved perhaps his most vitriolic disdain for Cronenberg's early horror films. Wood saw them as representative of the most reactionary element in the genre, hyper-misogynistic, and Wood even openly confessed to a hatred of Cronenberg films. And unfortunately, through Robin Wood's wide acclaim as a critic and as a scholar, this perspective became significantly influential in the earliest years of Cronenberg's commercial career. Now, the second situation leading to the disdain for Cronenberg's horror films in Canada emerged because it was considered contrary to the ostensible moral superiority of the Canadian film tradition of social realism inherited from the NFB. And because the film had received funding from the then newly formed Canadian Film Development Corporation, popular film critic Marshall Delaney, in the September 1975 edition of Toronto's Sunday Night magazine, wrote a review titled, "You should know how bad this film is. After all, you paid for it." Sadly for Delaney, that's what he's remembered for now. Now, Cronenberg had actually expected high praise from Delaney because he had viewed Cronenberg's earlier experimental films as highly progressive, in the language of Robin Wood, and he publicly touted them as such. But Delaney was not forgiving in his disdain towards Cronenberg's foray into commercial exploitation film with Shivers. But Cronenberg insisted that his films were both progressive and artistic. Demonstrative of this insistence is the insistence, by Cronenberg in the early 1980s that, quote, "I think of horror film as art," end quote. And he considered himself an artist. And he did this while discussing his work in public forums, infamously again at a panel at the time in the 1980s. In the company of horror film contemporaries John Landis and John Carpenter, he made these claims about art and being artistic, while, as he recalls, their mouths hung open. You can just imagine these two horror film icons. What are you doing, David? Claiming it's art? Are you insane? More to the point, Canadian film scholar Ernest Mathias describes Cronenberg's films in terms that might be understood without the rabbit hole of explaining the long history of these terms as anarchist progressive. Mathias states that for Cronenberg's early films, the inspiration did not lie with the search for a new order, but rather with the dismissal of all systems of order. However, stung by critics such as Wood and Delaney, Cronenberg took on sort of a defensive posture. He argued against any desire on his own part to really tear down bourgeois morality. He states that if you're a Red Brigade terrorist, I suppose it would be very cathartic to say, and to believe it, that you must tear down all the old order and live in eternal chaos. But I never really believed that, and I still don't. But to use the language of Slavoj Žižek, what if the opposite were true? What if tearing down the old order did not require living in the stereotype of anarchism as eternal chaos, but rather in eternal revelation and emancipation? And Cronenberg goes on to intimate some hope in this direction. He says, on the other hand, there is something stifling about a certain kind of monolithic order and established social structures. And in one of his most famous extended interviews, he openly exclaims that, "When I see what middle-class values are, they're not mine." So what if we looked at Cronenberg's films as an invitation to embrace his apocalyptic visions, not in the colloquial sense of apocalypse as sort of a wholesale annihilation of even the ostensibly innocent, but in the more sort of critical sense of a sweeping away of an immoral social fabric to be replaced with a fundamentally more emancipatory ideology? In fact, if we put Wood's own taxonomy of progressive and reactionary in the context of this type of Cronenberg's apocalyptic narrative contributions, rather than towards the conventions and themes of horror films, Cronenberg's early films all demonstrate this desire to sweep away what he sees as a stifling bourgeois morality. As it happens, French critics in particular saw Shivers as an attack on the bourgeois life and the bourgeois idea of morality in general, although the source of that quote doesn't quite make clear whether the French critics saw that as a bad or a good thing. So the moment of revelation in Cronenberg's films frequently manifests in the symbolic embrace of a kiss, followed by extensive serene beauty. The last image in Shivers is of all of the zombified, emancipated, sort of driving out in this serene, gentle a series of cars heading towards Montreal and the rest of the world. And this might be read metaphorically as the moment in which the characters kiss the world of bourgeois morality goodbye. In his post-apocalyptic Crimes of the Future, it's the lead character, Dr. Tripod's homosexual kiss of Dr. Rouge's necrophiliac bloodied mouth, that sets the narrative of Revelation in motion. It's actually quite beautiful if you like necrophilia. Okay, so that didn't work out. But so Shivers also incorporates beautiful zombies released sort of from their stultifying social prison. And it turns climactically at the moment. You can see here in the middle picture that lead character Dr. St. Luke succumbs to the kiss of his infected lover, Nurse Forsyth. In Rabid, the picture on the right, which you can see is a stock photo, according to Canadian film scholar Piers Handling, Rose's embrace signifies both attack and affection in a tension that Cronenberg consciously explores. And Canadian film scholar George Melnick states that in The Dead Zone, not pictured here, the hero receives the parting kiss of his true love once he's purged the world of an imminent nuclear threat. So, in conclusion, perhaps Robin Wood is subject to his own third-person critique. Perhaps he's being too dismissive and missing the most subversive implications of these films. Time and again, Cronenberg indicates that it's time to sweep away petty neoliberal bourgeois morality. It's time to kiss this world goodbye, so to speak. And this is not a lament that the world as it is might be destroyed in an avalanche of death and fear. It's really more a revelation of emancipation. And it's all really quite uplifting in the end, morally conscientious, if you will.
Thank you, David. Sprinkled some stardust on the conference. And now it is Mona for her 10 minutes.
Okay, so I will discuss a video of mine titled Death To by situating it in its distinct historical background, that is political wall writing, as activism, and compare and contrast the choices I have made in the video versus the real-life circumstances. Since I'm not showing the video here, I'm just going to start with reading a brief statement on the video. Thank you. Death To is the video documentation of a performance which explores the role of political wall writing as a form of activism, aiming for mass mobilization with a historical prominence in Iran. Political dissent, when formal channels of democratic protests are non-existent, often sees anti-authoritative messages being taken to the walls over the past several decades. Hastily written by the protesters and carelessly erased by the state agents, wall writings has a long archaeological presence in politically unstable countries, particularly in the Middle East. The case of Iran is the focus here as I layer these oppositional messages onto the wall, traditionally often starting with the phrase death to, followed by a political ideology or affiliation. In so doing, I repeatedly occupy the role of the protester by writing these statements in Farsi, then the state agent by carelessly painting them over, allowing the layers underneath to show through without ever attempting to erase the phrase death to. This process is meant to highlight the historical predominance of the rhetoric death to as politicized extension of colloquial language. This form of activism problematizes the citizen-state dynamics by foregrounding the role of the activist as disruptor of power relations. Challenging the authority by claiming the wall as a tool of mass communication before the figure of authority reclaims the power by the act of censorship, that is, painting over the writings. Background. During my recent research on Iran's political history through archival photos, on multiple occasions I came across snapshots of people painting over writings on the wall. That awakened a curiosity in me to know more about the history of this practice, as I had a clear visual memory of the wall writings being everywhere in Tehran as I was growing up. More digging revealed that this is a deeply rooted form of political activism across the Arab world, mostly with the same coordinates as Iran and in other regions like South Asia and Latin America within a modified context. Situating this practice in a broader view by looking into the geopolitics of the Middle East was a subsequent step, considering that the persistent lack of freedom of speech is a symptom of totalitarianism, regardless of surges of regime change, drive masses to explore themselves in other ways than having an open platform to protest. The role of foreign intervention in the region which happened to fuel such regimes, and its relation to the wall writings was another factor to take into consideration, manifestation of which can be detected in the backlash of Yankee Go Home, a staple in the protests against the United States in countries that it has intervened in. A noticeable pattern of paranoia and cynicism built into the rhetoric, suggesting the ongoing ominous infiltration of enemy, can be seen in the progression of wall writings as a byproduct of foreign intervention. Death to warmongers, agitators, and hypocrites that appear in my work clearly reiterate that mindset. Given this background, my intention was to point towards this practice as a form of activism with all its complexities and highlight the role of the wall both as a medium of free expression and as an agent that blurs the boundaries in the hierarchy of power between the activist and the state apparatus. Death to rhetoric. Looking at the history of political wall writing as activism in Iran, one can immediately detect a recurrent manifestation of slogans starting with death to or hail to since the days of the 1953 coup. Solid research was done on the history of wall writings, published under a book titled In Pursuit of Proper Understanding in Post-Revolution Iran, with a list of more than 700 pre-revolutionary slogans. The research results show that, in fact, the wall writings predominantly start with the phrase death to, and that stems from a peculiar place in Persian culture. Farsi is the language of bold exaggerations. In colloquial Farsi, we willingly wish death upon ourselves by saying, "May God kill me," when we do something wrong, and we equally address the death wish to others when they happen to be in an unfavorable position, in phrases such as, "Hope they bring the news of their death." This is when the lingo seeps into political defiance. In a surge of regime change, the wall writings starting with the phrase death to are oftentimes followed by the name of a party or an affiliation, but sometimes it is addressed towards an ideology, removing the clear-cut historical boundaries. One can see, for instance, death to imperialism, capitalism, and colonialism all throughout the years consistently, and sometimes it is difficult to associate them with a specific era. Death to America, a media-targeted slogan, falls into this ideological category, as it was the idea of America and what America stands for and represents that angered activists enough to put America next in the lineup after England, a popular death to slogan during the nationalization of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. So despite the common belief that it was the Islamic Republic that officially devised the term, the roots go further back to the American and British-designed coup of 1953. However, the Islamic Republic happened to highlight the rhetoric as part of their systematic propaganda in the media and integrate it into their state apparatus by organizing chanters who shouted at it in the streets and commissioned massive murals on the public walls based on it. The rhetoric did not only serve the pre- and post-Islamic Revolution ideologies, but also proved its anti-establishment legacy under the reign of the Islamic Republic by slogans such as "Death to the Executioner," referring to the 1988 mass cleansing of political prisoners, and later on, "Death to the Dictator," in the wake of the 2009 presidential election fraud. Manipulating the narrative. In real-life circumstances, these writings appear on the wall with a great sense of urgency and immediacy, oftentimes overnight. The intent of the anonymous activist is almost always a distinct hope for this practice to become contagious and galvanize the masses against the regime, which does happen to serve its purpose, at least during the bursts of unrest. One can notice how a few death to and hail to slogans immediately multiply into several hundreds in a matter of days, up to the point that ignoring them becomes an almost laborious task. The episode of censorship begins by the police patrol or an individual report, followed by state agents going over neighborhood by neighborhood and painting over the slogans one by one, without being able to or caring enough to do a meticulous job, as there are an abundance of them to be taken care of. That is how a passerby can literally read what they just supposedly painted over as a ghost imagery of the writing with a peculiar aesthetic to it. Sometimes another writing will appear on top of that whitewash immediately or with a delay, which creates a layered discourse that over time loses its capacity to communicate messages embedded in deeper layers, gesturing towards the archaeological quality of this practice. In making the video, I gave myself the artistic freedom to modify the actual circumstances on multiple levels. First was the notion of blurring the lines and obscuring the roles in order to foreground a practice. What I was interested in was to perform this binary of writing and erasure and to focus on it as a compulsive ritual of rivalry by concentrating on it, on the very act rather than a noticeable shift in roles. Then I slowed down the pace of writings to highlight the role of the activists and extracted the temporal aspect of slogans by painting over them immediately and writing another one on top to exaggerate the archaeological aspect of the ghost imagery as a discourse that has been buried down under layers of paint, encapsulating the intervals of protest and censorship. In such a circumstance, decoding these messages becomes almost impossible, even for the reader of Perso-Arabic alphabet, creating an indiscriminate language barrier. Instead, the role of the wall is foregrounded as a living, breathing medium of mass communication and practically the only platform of free speech that goes through these periods of consecutive tension between the activist and authority, the claim to power and its reversal time after time throughout all these years. Conclusion. In the end, this video is an effort to situate the practice of political wall writing as a reactionary response to the absolute absence of freedom of speech, a byproduct of foreign intervention within the grand narrative of imperialism, manifested as the reordering of the order under the pretext of humanitarian intervention and stabilization in a bid to give democracy to people. Foreign interventionism is guaranteed not only to destabilize the affected regions further, but also to fuel totalitarian regimes, that is, if not directly bringing them to power. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. That was fascinating. It was great to see some of your work there as well. And I think now we have Ambreen is making her way up to the hot seat. Or hot podium.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I would like to make a territorial acknowledgement that we are meeting here on the lands of the First Nations, and I think it's important to acknowledge. Okay, so the topic of my presentation is insights into the abstract representation of the Holy Quran as mehrab, artist's moral conscience, reflection of the society, or demand of the patron. Oh, the image is gone from here. I don't know why. Okay, so I wanted to show you the mehrab actually, and that was the image which is missing. Anyways, the mehrab is a Quranic term which traveled from the Quranic concept to the architectural feature. It is used in most of the mosques. Traditionally, in medieval mosque, the mehrab is like a niche, concave niche shape, which could be seen as an altar in the church. And it's a little excluded place. So the four walls of any mosque, the center mosque would be a Qibla director, which would give the direction towards the Qibla, the Holy Kaaba in Makkah. And this is very important component for a mosque. So any mosque could be very simple. It doesn't have to be highly decorated or ornamented, but it has to have a mehrab in there. So it's a very significant feature. Throughout the history, the mehrab has been built in a concave niche form. There are many other elements that have been added to it, for example, calligraphy, geometry, and other modern aspects, but it's always in the niche form. The mehrab that I am talking about, it's not in a niche form. It's unusual, it's unique, it's different from all other mehrabs that have been built in last 1400 years. So the mehrab picture is not here, but you can Google how the traditional mehrab looks like. I do have a PDF, yeah. Okay. Yes, so you can see this is the mehrab of Nasirul Mulk Mosque in Shiraz, which has many elements with geometry. And you can see it's beautiful. It's the whole wall would be straight and it would be a little concave. And I will show you why it's concave, and it can be seen from the outside of the mosque as well. And you can see inscriptions all over. You can see geometrical patterns. So this is a traditional mehrab. The mehrab I am talking about, it's located in Pakistan, in Islamabad, which is the capital city. And when Pakistan got its independence, they were thinking that where to build a capital, and Islamabad it was concluded that Islamabad will be a capital, and it's a planned city. You can see on the map here on the right side, the Islamabad is towards north side, and the mosque picture is also on the map. You can see it's a triangular shape. It's not a dome. Again, the dome is very tradition with medieval mosques, but this mosque is very different in many ways. So one way is the triangular shape, which is a like tent. You can see it here, which has 4 minarets in the corner. And the architect said that I have been inspired with the illusionary image of the Kaaba. So the Kaaba is a square in shape, and it has just give a little bit angle to make its roof like a Arabian tent, pre-Arabian tent, which is very going back to the history and tradition. So this was very innovative. This is the picture of inside the mosque. So the mehrab that I'm talking about, it's in the center in the form of a holy book. You can see the sculpture just in the middle of the mosque, which is a book, holy book, the open book. And you can see so many people here. I took this picture in 2015 when I was doing the field work, and it was Ramadan, so you can see so many people there. As I was mentioning, that it is different. So you can see in the first picture on the left side, the Qibla wall is significantly different from all other walls because it has the concave angle from outside. So people can see the mosque from outside and they would know in which direction to pray. So mehrab is shown from the outside of the mosque. In this mosque, the mehrab is not shown. So how would people know? So they would know with these crescent on the top. Can you see the crescent on the top in the center? Yeah. So this is the indicator of mehrab again from the outside. And you can see that this sculpture is pulled into the mosque instead of outside. Instead of exclusion or making it separate, it's inside the building, so which is very different. The artist said that he made this mehrab very different in a very conscious way. He said that this mehrab is different from any other mehrab that is built in the last 1400 years. It is like somebody with open arms welcoming you. It is essentially a place of prayer for me. It is a place of reverence and a place where everyone is welcomed equally. Because normally they just have a niche and they call it mehrab. But this is a sign of welcome, which is a very strong statement in a context in 1950s when we can see sectarian conflicts. People would be having conflicts with Shia and Sunni and Ahmadis. And we also know that in 1974, the constitutional amendment in section 298C, Ahmadis were declared as non-Muslims, so people would not consider them as Muslims. People from Sunni sect, for example, would not go to Shia mosque, and from Shia mosque, they would not go to the Sunni mosque. So the mosques are separated places, and no one would pray after each other. So this statement, and this is a national mosque of Pakistan, so this was designed as a grand national mosque of Pakistan, which it still is in the capital city, and it became a symbol of the country as well. So in that situation where between all these conflicts, this artist is making a statement and bringing his own moral conscience to the world and to all the people. And why he came up with the different design, it's again going back to the tradition. And I would show a quote of Jeffries talking to the ancestors and making connection, dialogue with the tradition. So as I said, that it's different in its formal way, but it's very rooted in tradition. The Holy Quran itself is a very significant element of Muslims' faith. You can see behind the Qibla wall, just behind the mehrab, there is a wall which gives which has some Quranic inscriptions as well. The mehrab itself has the entire chapter from the Quran. And interestingly, it has been written in the Kufic script, which is a very old script. Many people would have difficulty in reading the Kufic script because this was one of the oldest scripts. But he used the Kufic script in gold, and in the center you can see the reflection of Allah, the word Allah. So let me contextualize this mehrab with Rubenov's insight. And we have been talking about throughout this morning, and I think the quote we took, we are just looking at the same quote with different interpretations. So original art is not limited to a reflection of culture that is contemporary to it, but it's even more beyond it. And as Jeffries mentioned, that it's more about the dialogue with the ancestors and more about going back to the tradition, but in a very creative and innovative way, which doesn't seem like that we are just following whatever it's happening in the society. So original art is created beyond the limits, and it informs rather than reflects. So this mehrab does not reflect what is happening in there, but it informs what should be happening or how we should be reacting to it. I selected this picture for conclusion because I want to mention this, that I was there. This place is one level above from the main floor. And this is a segregated place for women to pray. So during the prayer time, I was not allowed on the main floor. I was sitting there and I was looking everything. There was a sermon going on, and I traveled from London to Pakistan just to see this mehrab. And I'm like, why they are not allowing me to go in? Why would I wait for it? So I waited for many hours in the women's section, which was one level ahead from the main section. And I waited for all people to leave the mosque so I can go and study the mehrab. So that exclusion is still there. The artist said that it is welcoming, everyone is welcome, but not women. So I was just looking from the grill, this small box, it has all grills, so no one can see from the down that I'm using my camera or I'm sitting there, I'm studying. But that's my own experience as a visitor, visiting that place. So yes, I would say that Gulji has informed, he has informed the society with some moral conscious issues, but it's now our responsibility to react to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambreen. Another fascinating paper. And I think our final paper of the day is it Maria? Yes, Maria.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. For those of you I have not yet the opportunity to meet, I'm Maria. I'm a current MA student or candidate with the Department of Art History and Visual Studies at the University of Victoria, defending, hopefully, in April 2020. My current research looks at the education potential in the embodied experience we as people have when immersed within the context of or directly related to a specific lesson. Specifically, I'm looking at the importance of museum homes as significant sites to our understanding of cultural heritage. And the primary theories which I am applying to these arguments that I am making are related to or are of phenomenology and contextual education with some relevance to constructivist theory. My presentation today does have pieces of my research embedded within it. However, I'm going to be turning away from my present case study, which is a house in Cumbria in the Lake District in England, Hilltop Cottage, and I will be looking at the Point Ellis house, which is some previous research that I have done that is located in Victoria, British Columbia. And I'm looking at the colonialist narratives and the hidden and educational history of Victoria's Point Ellis house and the moral imperative embedded within these artifacts and the site itself. And we're going to have to do the PDF thing because this has happened to me as well, I think. Oh, no, it's just an extra slide. We're good. So the Point Ellis House is a BC heritage site. It was once the home of Peter O'Reilly, who had immigrated to Canada from Ireland in 1859. And he served with the BC government as magistrate, judge, and gold commissioner, which brought him to work all over the province between the years of 1859 and 1881. He also worked as the province's Indian Reserve Commissioner from 1880 until 1898, which is where most of the relevance will come in. During the later 19th century, while they were living here, the house was one of Victoria's upper-class social centres, as the family had kept and preserved most of their personal items, documents, and furnishings. This house today is Western Canada's most complete collection of Victoriana that is seen within its original setting. Descendants of the family remained in the house until 1975, when it was bought by the provincial government and opened as an official BC heritage site. And this is an image, more recent image of the parlor in the house, and you can kind of get a general idea of all of the artifacts that are displayed, again, within their original setting. So the Point Ellis House is located in an area in Victoria called Rock Bay. It is neighboring an area called Selkirk, and it was once referred to almost exclusively as the Point Ellis area. So both Selkirk, which is the neighboring area, and Point Ellis were named in the 1840s by Hudson's Bay Company officers at Fort Victoria. They were the 5th Earl of Selkirk and Edward Ellis, who were both major figures in the fur trade and colonial politics. Ellis was also a merchant and slave owner in the West Indies who expanded his wealth through the acquisition and sale of lands during their colonial project. There are currently no markers with mention to either of these men, specifically in terms of this Ellis, in Victoria anywhere. The original O'Reillys who lived in the home spent their lives in the service of British law and bureaucratic efficiencies, given the nature of Peter's governmental positions. Peter's work made him responsible for setting over 600 Indian reserves in British Columbia, meaning that he took a substantial amount of land away from BC's First Nations people, which is a narrative that the home has conveniently lost within their visitor experience and education since it first opened in the 1970s. Additionally, which I'll talk about a little bit, the family employed house staff with a variety of cultural backgrounds, which is also representative of the diversity that is overlooked that was happening and still continues in Victoria and BC today. And that's an image of the front of the house. We've got Peter, I think he's the one in the darker top, and then his wife Caroline next to him, and then a visitor. In 2000, the curator and the BC Heritage Manager commissioned and taped a dramatized tour to be offered to visitors to the site that was accessible through a personal tape player. Their goal was to portray a multicultural history by incorporating representations of the cultural and racial diversity of the BC population of the later 19th century. These tapes, which are no longer in use due to their insensitive nature, are narrated by a Chinese houseboy with whose character figures throughout as the authority on the O'Reilly family and their daily lives. He describes their social lives, their relationships, as well as the objects within the household and the ways that they would have been used. The second and third characters are a Cockney housemaid and an Irish gardener. They are all very highly generalized, and given the fact that the family did keep and document most things, it's a huge shame that they're not given names or actually personalized as real people who did work in the home. So just to put that tour aside for a moment, it should also be mentioned that this house, like many museum homes, exists only because exists as a museum, only because it represents the upper class white settler community, and because of its provenance as the home of a man who was essential to the imperial administration of British Columbia. To segue back to this tour, the tape offers the narrative of the family's domestic affairs, and it does not address the significance that these items hold in reference to what was happening outside of the home. So these past curators who commissioned this tape have argued that Peter O'Reilly's work was not addressed in their tours because it did not happen in the house, and therefore the house should not be representative of it. And this is incredibly problematic, as the entirety of the family's domestic life was definitely dependent on the work that Peter was doing outside of the home. So this tape was ditched about 5 years ago. However, it wasn't until last summer that, however, it was still offered upon request to visitors who were familiar with it until last summer. And here we have an image of the ladies of the house and their friends having tea on the back lawn. So this museum has had a number of directors over the past decade. It's run by a variety of different societies, or it has been. So there's a lot of politics that go behind what they can and cannot put in it. But last summer, during the museum's 2018 summer season, I was working there as a visitor services coordinator. A new director came on board. His name's Dr. Kelly Black. He's a recent PhD graduate, having specialized in BC's colonialist history, and brings a fresh and important perspective to the property. So having had the pleasure of working with Dr. Black last summer, and I got to see many of the first changes that were happening, they're continuing to happen this summer. He describes his job as being responsible to encourage people to visit a place that encapsulates the everyday life of a man who was responsible for the setting out of over 600 Indian reserves. Similar to Edward Ellis, whom the area is named after, Point Ellis House and the O'Reilly family have been greatly forgotten by most people. So there is little to no information outside of the site on Peter O'Reilly's role in the reserve system and the bureaucracy of the Indian affairs in BC of the time. The house and its thousands upon thousands of objects tell many different stories. However, one, as the museum is stepping into the 2019 summer season, something that Dr. Black is really focusing on is its settler colonialist history to raise more awareness of the controversial and often wrongdoing business that had happened on behalf of the settler colonialist population. One story that we have all believed is worth mentioning is O'Reilly's relation to John A. Macdonald, our first Prime Minister of Canada. Peter was married to Caroline Trutch. She was the sister of Joseph Trutch, and Joseph was the first Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia. So therefore, they had very direct ties with the federal government as well. When Macdonald visited Vancouver Island in 1886, he had been a guest for tea and dinner at the Point Ellis House. Additionally, if you're from Victoria, you might be familiar with his name, but Sir Matthew Bailey Begbie, who was the province's first Chief Justice, also notoriously known as the hanging judge, often visited the house for ice cream and tennis. His ghost haunts downtown Victoria, if you're interested. He's mentioned on every ghost tour. The everyday artifacts that are displayed within this home have the potential to speak to the connections and educate visitors not only on the relationships that the O'Reilly family had with these political figures, but the issues and problems that are associated with the work these men and the family did regarding the colonization of Canada. On Dr. Black's website, he says that if we want to better understand the settler history of Canada and how we ourselves fit into this history, museums like Point Ellis House are essential. Settler colonialism is every single day. It's in the names and the statues that we encounter. It's in the tea parties and the dispossession that we look at, and the roses and the reserves. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you to all four of you. In addition to being impeccably delivered, I was so impressed by the PowerPoint slides and how professional they look. So what we're going to do is use the next 20-odd minutes to ask people around the room to ask questions of 1, 2, 3, or all of the speakers, and we'll see if we can get some conversation going. So does anyone want to kick off? Yes, Charo.
This is for Ramona. I'm just curious if you can talk a bit more about how your video is installed, if you've shown it before, and how you meant to have viewers receive or view it.
Yeah, so the video has been installed, and it's on a projection, and it's always positioning it is almost always a pain because you have to kind of angle the projector. So my vision is so that when I'm standing and I'm actually writing on the wall, my feet are positioned just parallel to the floor so that it kind of gives the illusion that I'm there and I'm doing it right there. And depending on what the projector I'm dealing with, sometimes it becomes a laborious task to kind of like angle it in the right position. But yes, so it normally just occupies one wall of any gallery or exhibition hall. And yeah, so it's just kind of like playing around with it, position it the right way. But it's just single channel video and there is no sound.
Thank you. Yes.
My question is to Ambreen. So you told us that the artist wanted to make it accessible to everyone. So in real life, what you experienced was like it was accessible to everyone. What is the acceptance of public? And I want to know, is it difficult to get permission to take pictures and get into it? Like, what is your experience?
Okay. So regarding the first question, that is it welcoming enough to bring people from all different sects? Yes. So this mosque will welcome all people from all faiths, all sects of Muslim, and even non-Muslims as well. Sometimes they have tours, but they won't allow the tours to happen in the prayer timings. So this is one thing.
So like Shia, Sunni, Ahmadiyya, like
everyone would come and pray there. Yes.
That's
so especially on the Laylatul Qadr night, we were talking about it, the night of power, which is one of the celebrated night during the month of Ramadan, which falls on in the 23rd night of the Ramadan, which they celebrate. There is a huge celebration there, huge festivities there. So the entire night people would come, they would pray. Women as well are welcomed, but not on the main floor. They would sit on the first floor. But outside, because this mosque can accommodate about 10,000 people inside the mosque, but 15,000 outside the mosque. So outside, there are no restrictions where you would pray and where you can sit. So I saw many, many families. And I met many women there who said that this is the only mosque where we can come and pray, not any other mosques. Because in Pakistan, most of the local mosques would not have separate space for women. So usually so I would say he was successful to some extent. And this mosque do welcome many, many people. And your second question about the permissions. So the first day when I went there, I was just wearing my shalwar kameez, not wearing the hijab. So people there, they thought that I have converted to maybe Christianity or something. And I have married with some non-Muslim guy. And they were just making their own thoughts. I don't know why, but they were doing that. And I was not welcomed. And I realized that I have to make appropriations if I really want to enter in the mosque. So what I did, second day when I went with the scarf and with the cultural appropriations, whatever I had to make, I made that. Then I started to speak with people. And with my hijab, people were little curious that now this lady has come, so let's talk. And when I spoke to people who were visiting the mosque, they said all these things, that when you came first day, we were thinking this about you. So, and you are trying to do this research to correct your mistake that you have made by marrying someone non-Muslim. So I said, no. So this was one aspect. The other aspect from the administration point of view, as I said, that I was not allowed during the prayer time in the main section. But beside that, they would open the mosque only for me at late hours without their opening timing. So they were very gracious. They allowed me to take the pictures. Even I took an interview and I did video shooting and everything inside the mosque with the imam. So he accepted that and he allowed me. And I have all the documentation, photos, videos, everything. So I don't think I had major problems. I think it was just 1 or 2 days when I really have to break the ice, which I did, but it was all okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone in the room? Yes, Karoon.
It's a question for Ambreen. I'm really excited that we finally got to hear what your work is, and just again welcoming you in future forums to notify us that you have some presentations there, and we'll be in touch as well on the themes. So I'm interested to just go back to the themes of the forum And do you feel like this was, in a sense, this artist following their own conscience and in opposition to something within society, or simply amplifying an ideal that perhaps wasn't quite exemplified to, I don't know, his or her, his estimation of how important that ideal of togetherness, intersectarian togetherness was, or was it quite in opposition to what the prevailing value structure was? So that's sort of my question there.
Mm-hmm. So I would say this artist, he has different kind of image and personality in Pakistan. And I forgot to mention that this mosque was commissioned by a Saudi king, King Faisal, and this artist was close to him. So he made stone portrait, lapis lazuli stone portraits for kings in Saudi and different places. So when this mosque was under construction, he was not given contract to make a mehrab. And there was a Turkish architect who actually won the competition. There was an international competition to design this mosque. A Turkish architect won this competition, and then there was a wave that why not Pakistani artists have contribution in the Grand Mosque of Pakistan? And then the committee decided to include some local artists to be just inclusive as a mosque for Pakistani local people as well. So there was two artists. One was Satken, whose painting is just inside the mosque, a huge painting. The second one is this Gulji. And the architect had different design for the mehrab. And Gulji, when he came in, he didn't took that mehrab. His style is to just, if he's making something, he would sit, he would contemplate, and he would deeply be thinking about what's gonna work in this situation. And he would do that with his canvases as well. So what he did, he would go and he would sit. And if you go back to the main prayer area, which is inside the mosque, you could see the patterns emerging by itself. So the wall behind the mehrab has some intersections which would give some shapes. If you go or look more deeper, you would say that this, if there is a mehrab which is circular form and niche form, it would not fit into the context. So he needed something pointed with angular forms, so therefore he designed this and connected with the holy book. And very interestingly, he added some lapis lazuli stonework in the middle with word Allah and golden plates for the entire chapter of the Quran. And just in addition to it, that this was my master's dissertation, and I just pulled this because I thought that it's very relevant with Jeffrey's work. The way Jeffries makes sculpture, I found so many similarities with Gulji's work, and therefore, so my PhD work is primarily focused on the use of the Quranic text on human body and in non-sacred spaces. So my work will not be centered on the mosque per se, but more communal spaces, public spaces, and also on human body. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak and being a Rubinov Scholar. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes. Well, we've got one from Nick, and then we'll go to Vid.
So it's for Mona. Thanks. It was so interesting to learn about the wall writing and your work. I've written about street art and graffiti a fair amount. And so one thing that I was thinking about is whether, and if so, how your work takes up the fact, I presume it's a fact, that the wall writing is extremely risky. Is that right, in Tehran? Maybe some kind of, it's risky in the US and Canada. You can go to jail. Usually it's for like vandalism, and sometimes they'll fine you a large amount. But maybe the sanctions are stricter. I'm just wondering, but then the people erasing it, they're sanctioned by the state to do that. And I'm just wondering if your work takes up this kind of asymmetry of power, the risk that's involved in creating these writings.
I think I kind of touched upon it in the talk, but I just wanted to focus on that moment of tension between basically the activism and the antitheses to that. So and then create that formal element of writing and erasure, and just keep doing that as kind of like a standpoint of the whole narrative. But yeah, in answer to your question about whether it's risky or not, it's definitely risky. If you go here in jail for vandalism, you probably go and just no one will see you, depending on what's going to happen. But it's very probable that you would go to an infamous political prison, and no one knows when you will be, or if you will ever be released, or what's going to happen to you in jail. So it is very risky, and yeah, it is sanctioned by states. That's generally how it works, but normally they're not super vigilant in just erasing it, just because it's very inconvenient. They can't just go around or just pay people to go around and just kind of like be on the watch and see, okay, so one pops up and send someone over. So normally it works, and then every couple of months or something like that, they would just go over and in a patrol, and then they have like pints of it. Normally how it works is like jars and pints of paint in the back of this van, so people just pop out, they just like very lazily kind of just wash it off. Sometimes they even use the same color spray and kind of like try to make like a flower out of it or something like that. They totally do that sometimes creatively, but that's normally how it works. So there are a lot of if you walk around the streets, you probably have a good chance of coming across at least a dozen of them. Yeah.
Vid. Yeah, my question is for David. So I was just wondering, was there a kind of a, just given how bizarre some of these plots are, was there a sort of kind of a subculture kind of weaved around these films in a kind of my sense is that they are cult films, right? In the kind of technical sense of the term. So I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about the reception.
It's really interesting that you asked that, Vid. And sorry, I forgot that I presented for a minute. I just had to remember what we're talking about. Not in Canada is the simple answer. And these the bizarre plot lines, they were actually in many ways relatively conventional. There's been a lot of comparisons between Cronenberg's early horror films, Shivers in particular, and Romero. There's even scenes. There's one scene that I compare in my dissertation between Romero zombies coming over the hill in the opening scene of Night of the Living Dead. And this one scene where the zombies come over the hill. But, Romero has often been touted as really progressive, where Cronenberg suffered this backlash of being really reactionary, particularly by Robin Wood. And yet, in some contexts, it's strange, because Romero's zombies were definitely othered, and so the narrative was progressive in that way, in terms that they were made other. Whereas Cronenberg's zombies, they're just not the bad guys, really, in the movie. The bourgeois morality is really, the fecal mouth kissing, and there's homosexuality in it. There's young people attacking. There's gerontophilia in it. Things that would be offensive to bourgeois morality, and he's sort of challenging why are these offensive by placing these zombies in a context where you kind of don't mind them. And a lot of what they say is really intelligent. Nurse Forsyth has a long speech where she's very progressive in what she's talking about. And so, but back to the context, not really. I mean, this is what made him an aberration in the Canadian landscape, is that Canadian NFB inflected, which is a problematic term, I know, and the canon of Canadian films, also very whitewashed colonial settler canon that had been allowed when other people were making films. But a lot of it was social realism, not socialist realism, I need to make that clear, but social realism. And this became sort of the tradition, and part again of this illusion of moral superiority to the commodity and spectacle of American film. Ours are smart films, ours are socially informed. And Cronenberg comes out with these otherwise exploitation films. And so it was easy to peg them as the bad guy in the Canadian landscape of moral superiority, but if we have a closer look. So the short answer to your question is no, they were aberrations. They were strange. There was cult across North America, but in terms of Canadian cinema in particular, no, he was the odd duck.
Briefly asked that people like Bruce LeBruce and people like that who make these kind of queer zombie films now, did they sort of drink of that
blood-stained fountain. So it's hilarious that you asked that. But Bruce actually emailed me like 2 weeks ago, and he emails me about once every 2 months because he knows that I'm a relatively, by Canadian standards, conservative heterosexual male who's a film scholar, and he likes to send me clips of the last thing he did, which are, I mean, if you know Bruce's work, I mean, it's graphic homosexual pornography and violence in order to make a political statement. And he's like, oh, check out this scene, and I open it, oh, what is Bruce working on? Oh, come on, Bruce. I have kids, but in my conversations with him, he's quite frank. He said, taking a cue from Cronenberg, he also lists some Apocalypse. He's a big fan of Tarkovsky. He's a big fan specifically of Tarkovsky, but also he lists Godwin. But really, he says a lot of the aesthetic is me trying to add my particular political spin. He's considered part of the so-called queer movement of the Toronto New Wave, Bruce is, and that's why he ended up not working in Toronto, because he was, I think, a little too radical even for that scene. But the answer is yes. Yeah, he said quite clearly. Cronenberg, big influence. Yeah. And the imagery is quite clear. He's obviously trading on abjection, visual abjection, the exact same way that Cronenberg was, yeah. Do you know Bruce? No. Well,
Not that I'd admit.
Yeah, be wary of who you make friends with. I guess. Bruce he's a great guy. Don't get me wrong. He's the kindest, gentlest person I've ever met. But he likes to shock people with images, the same way Cronenberg did. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to wrap things up unless anyone is dying to ask a question. Okay, well, can I thank all 4 student speakers? Those were fantastic papers. It's so interesting to hear what you guys are getting up to. It's really fascinating and diverse set of work. So thank you to the 4 of you. And thanks also to the 3 who spoke this morning. So I think the afternoon, Karoon, we've got a few things. Some of you are going to Vaughan's. Right. Studio, and others are going to have a look around Helliwell. And then I must remind everyone that at 6 o'clock or 6-ish back in Seabreeze, we have these 2 very brief fireside talks by James and Zach, who will be introducing themselves to everyone in an informal setting over Caesars and gin and tonics or whatever it may be. So, Karoon, do you have anything to add?
No, I just wanted to say, please find your way to the small buffet room that we had the breakfast in. That's where we're going to be for 6 o'clock. So, and I trust Alan, where are you there? You're going to be leading yes, I know, not Mark. You're going to be leading the students over to Vaughan's today. Those who want to go. Okay. So that's it for today. We did really great on the breakfast timing. So let's do that again tomorrow. Otherwise, enjoy the afternoon.